Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting live stream for this week's 3M Open. Got to break down what to expect from conditions this week, answer all of your questions, and get you ready for all of your DFS and prop exposure. By the end, hopefully you're ready with all the information that you need to go out there and get your build started. But first off, welcome on in wherever you guys are. Hopefully you're having a fantastic Wednesday and are ready to go ahead and deep dive this slate. We've already got Allen down there, Soda Kid, Soli, Metro, Rev, and Turnover as well. Hopefully you guys are having a fantastic start to your day and like I said, are ready to get after it because we're just going to go ahead and hop right on in. And if you're just joining us, go ahead and smash that like button on the way in. If you're watching this on replay, go ahead and do so as well. And let's get those numbers up out here on this preview. Any questions that you've got, you can throw it down in the live chat. We're going to start with those when we get to the DFS section. But right off the bat, I want to address everyone's weather concerns off the start, which I think for the first 2 days does give us something to look at and something to pay attention to. So for Thursday, let's look at the HRRR model, which for most of the day, Thursday looks calm. In fact, you've only got a little bit of wind coming in the afternoon, but even that wind is going to be sub 10 miles an hour. So your wind gusts are pretty much non-existent the entire day. And although it's going to start off a little bit cool, around 57 degrees Fahrenheit, it's going to be in the mid 60s about an hour and a half later. So I don't know if I'd worry all that much about that temperature. And for Thursday, I think whether you're an AM or a PM wave player, you're going to go out there and score relatively well. So a scoring average around 1, maybe even slightly under 1 under par would not surprise me for the field on Thursday. Where we start to get this weather aspect is when we take a look at Friday, and there's a few models that we're going to have to look at here, but no matter which model we look at for Friday, almost all of them are calling for pretty nasty conditions. And you can see in a few of them in particular that the PM wave looks to get the slightly harder end of things. So over here on this HRDPS, you'll see that the PM wave has significantly higher winds than the morning. This NAM model has it pretty gnarly the entire day, but maybe those slightly higher sustained winds in the afternoon. It does look like it's going to be gusty in the morning, though. So this model looks a little bit more flat than what we see in some of the other ones that we'll look at here. But when you go through the rest of them here on Friday, you'll see that the afternoon wave looks to be getting substantially higher winds, closer to that 12, maybe even 15 mile an hour range, and then wind gusts into the 20, maybe 25 mile an hour range. And with all the water around this golf course, that could lead to some carnage out there on Friday afternoon. So you'll see that with the icon model here. We go over to the GFS model, similar type of story, right? The wind's kind of kicking up as the day goes on. And what I want to avoid out here in some of my lineups are guys playing when it's going to be its nastiest. With this golf course with all the water can bring really big scores into play. And even if you go out there and you have a respectable round on Thursday, if you're shooting 3-4 of a par out there on Friday, it's going to be next to impossible to make the weekend. So I think if there's going to be an edge out there over the first 2 rounds, something that we can make actionable for our DFS lineups, it's attacking some of those PM AM wave players, guys that are going off late on Thursday, and that should be avoiding most of the gnarly winds out there on Friday. So I don't think it's definitive. Again, the NEM model was calling for pretty flat conditions out there on Friday. So it's not like I'm going all in out there on the PM AM guys. But in terms of my player pool, I saw it's 75 to 80% of my player pool are guys playing on that side of the wave draw. And over 40% of my lineups are guys only playing as PM AM starters. And the other 60% are almost all 4-2s or 5-1s. So I'm definitely incorporating the weather into what I'm doing this week. I do want to add the asterisk, though, that it's not like a definitive edge. I mean, obviously, we're trying to project what's going to happen over a day from now, so things can change. But as of the information that we have here on Wednesday night, it does look like something that you might want to consider. And up top, you'll see with some of my exposure, I'll bring up my projection sheet now for you guys, that I'm still going to be playing guys that are in the AM up top. But when I start to get down to that 6-7K range, there's maybe only 1-2 players that I'm taking that are going off early tomorrow. And pretty much everyone else from 8K and below is going to be in that PM AM wave. So with my, scrubs, the guys that I don't trust as much out there on Friday, I'm trying to make sure that they're getting the better end of the wave draw. Whereas an Akshay Bhatia, for example, a Keith Mitchell, guys that I bet up there towards the top end of the board are the guys that I'll excuse a little bit and play out there in the bad wave. So that's how I'm handling the weather. We'll go ahead and circle our focus now over to the DFS side, where we can go over some of your specific player questions and talk through some of the ownership and trends throughout the ranges. So we're going to talk through the player pool, talk through a few guys I wanted to add to the fold on top of the plays that we talked about there on the Monday video, and I have a few ownership numbers on here as well. So of course, right, you're not going to have all the data points here on this free video. However, on the Patreon page, you can get this completely uncensored. But even on top of what I usually show on these live streams, I did want to add in a few ownership marks like what we have here with Tony Finau, right? I've got Tony Finau at just over 30% ownership. So you're going to see a few added little data points on there for you guys, just to kind of help us talk about a few things here on the live stream, give us a few talking points of whatnot, and keep the conversation moving forward. So with that being said, let's catch up on the live chat, some of those questions, and then I'll talk through the DFS and the strategy for this week. So is my projected ownership for a specific GPP or more in general? It's not for a specific GPP. It is for large field contests. So large field GPPs like the big $20 or the big $5 contest. Those kind of contests have next to no difference in ownership. I mean, obviously, there's going to be individual variance with players, but for the most part, it's pretty much copy and paste from contest to contest. So yeah, that's what the ownership is meant for, where a majority of people are playing their action. In single entries, in smaller field contests, is where you're going to see more variance. And those are a lot harder to predict. And no, not what my projections are meant for. So yeah, meant for the large field GPPs, and it is labeled as such out there on the spreadsheet. Let's see what else we've got. Thoughts on Russell Knox. So I'll just give them to you right now, Soda. The price tag is way too cheap. When I was going through and we were getting the late ads with Russell Knox, the fact that he was the pure $6,000 price tag was very jarring. I mean, I saw that too. I thought it was a clear misprice. Not that he's in the best form, not even like he's the best course fit, but if you need to go down to $6,000, I have no need to in my lineups this week, that he could be an option there. Full transparency, I'm not using him myself. However, I thought the price tag was definitely a little bit of a surprise, and I think he's in play. Turnover says he went with Finau over 8.5 fairways and Sahith under 14.5 greens. You hope it hits. Yeah, I hope it hits too out there for your exposure. And yeah, I think those are pretty decent leans. So good stuff, man. Hit that like button, Soda Kid. You absolutely agree with you there. You heard the guy. Happy Birdie Fest, you D-Gens. Should be a lot of fun. I agree with you. What's going on, Barry? Let's smash Chan Kim this week. I'm right there with you, Barry. So, hey, like I said, Barry's the man down there. If you're on him, that makes me even happier about it. All right, let's talk through some of the ownership trends and a few players that I wanted to point out to you guys. So up top in the 10K range, everyone is getting ownership. So whether it's Burns, Thigala, Finau, heck, I'll even include like Akshay, Billy Horschel in that mix. Your lowest ownership number is at about 17%. You've got Akshay at about 27.5%. I've got Finau up here. You guys can see that at about 30.7%. You're not going to get cute with anyone up top. The one thing worth noting is that if you're a truther on the PM AM wave, your only option is Sam Burns. So, you know, obviously, if I'm taking that approach in my lineups, you probably know that I'm using them out there in my player pool. So I don't think that's giving away too much, telling you that I'm playing Sam Burns now. But in terms of a PM option, he's really all we've got to work with. A few things I'll tell you about Burns. I first off was considering betting him this week already. I also was looking at him from a lot of the birdie or better stats, decent with some of the proximity buckets that we're looking at, mostly the mid to long irons that he hit at this golf course. So he almost made my core plays video. And now when he's getting the better side of conditions, I was totally fine getting just as Sam Burns. So I guess I could have had him on here as one of those highlighted plays. But yeah, if you're looking for a PM wave option, he's really the only guy up top that you can take. Outside of him, I guess it's somebody like a Billy Horschel. He's PM wave, or he's $9,600. And then also JT Poston down here at $9,200. So only 3 guys that are $9,000 plus that you can include, which means that if you're playing PM-centric lineups, these guys are going to be significantly higher owned to those combinations. So if you're choosing to take the game theory edge, tack those sort of tee times, just know that these sort of players that might be lower owned out there with total ownership, and those kind of lineups are going to be like 60 to 80, 90% owned out there in those kind of builds. So when you're starting with those kind of players, don't look at them as a leverage piece, even though they might be lower owned than some of the guys like a Tony Finau and Akshay Bhatia that are like 27.5% owned, because in your subset of lineups in the large field GPP, and it's not even a ton of people that play the weather edge, right? Just know that it's probably like 5%. At most, I would say, that are out there playing weather edge, but those lineups are going to have a lot of the same players. Because if you're playing that weather edge, you're starting with those three up top, and then even your like 7K to 8K options. I mean, it's a pool of like 8 to 12 guys really in that portion of the pool that most people are going to be getting to. So when you're playing the weather edge, just know it can reap benefits. I'm doing that this week. But you have to be very creative with your lineup construction sometimes. You have to be a little bit more cognizant about some of your duplicates, because it takes your player pool down from 156 players, in this case down to 78 players. And when it's 78 choose 6, there are a whole lot less combinations than it's when it's 156 choose 6, right? If you know statistics, right, you'll know that it's orders of magnitudes of difference between the two. And that's why you got to be a little bit more cognizant about the ownership duplicating in some of that leverage. So that's what I'll say about it. I'm still playing that weather edge, but know that because there's not a ton of PM guys up here, it does make things a little complicated when it comes to getting different. It's not impossible, but leaving salary on the table might be something that you guys might want to explore, or really getting different down there in that 6 and 7K range. Down in the 9Ks in terms of ownership, it's relatively spread out. Guys like Keith Mitchell are some of the higher owned options at about 18.4%. I also wanted to include Cam Davis on here at 16.4% as one of your higher owned players. And I'm still using him, even though he is an AM Wave player, because just like Sam Burns, he was a guy I was eyeing up even before we got those tee times. So I just want to point out Cam Davis, I guess, to show you guys that I'm not just using those PM players, but he is in the minority of those guys that I am using out there early tomorrow. Still love EVR, still love Emiliano Grillo. Both of those are going to be in that PM wave. So obviously as outright bets, as core plays to begin the week, it's always great to see them in the better side of conditions. I've got Eric Van Rooyen at about 14.6%. Also Grillo only at about 12.8% ownership. But just as I was mentioning before, when you're using them in PM only stacks, they're going to have effectively higher ownership because you're only using those players out there in those lineups. So when you're trying to get unique with starting with one of those guys up top and then one of those 8K players, you're not going to be as different as you're probably expecting, right? Even though EVR is only like 15% and Emiliano Grillo is only like 13%. So, this is something that I'm still trying to kind of run the numbers on, trying to figure out how it impacts your ROI of your lineups when playing a weather edge, because honestly, it's something that only recently I've really become aware of out there with the combinations and whatnot. So we've always noticed that ownership gets bumped up when we have a weather edge out there. But the other aspect we have to consider is the lack of leverage. So obviously something that we'll have to track and see how it does going forward. But I'm interested to know the duplication rate versus like the theoretical dupes. So what I mean by this is how I'm going to track this, by the way, guys, is in theory, if you take a lineup's ownership, product ownership, you multiply them by each other, you multiply it by the amount of entries in a contest, that gives you the theoretical amount of dupes, okay? What we can do is we can count the actual amount of dupes, which is oftentimes way different, right, than the theoretical amount of dupes, and compare the two numbers. If the actual amount of dupes of these kind of lineups is like double what it should be, right, double that theoretical amount of dupes, that means that there's an issue there. That means that what we're talking about, this issue with getting different with the weather edge, is truly an issue. If I'm running these numbers and it's right on the theoretical amount of dupes, then maybe we don't have to worry about it as much, right? So I'm going to try and do that going forward. And frankly, I don't think anyone has back tested that at this point. And I'm very interested to know what that's going to look like. So something I'm going to be doing for this week. And it's going to take us at least like 4 or 5 events to get the sample we're looking for. But something I'll definitely be keeping a little bit of an eye on. Moving down a little bit further, we got Ben Griffin, Michael Thorbjornsen. Worth pointing out that both of these value plays were in the bad wave. So a few guys that I'm still using out there in my lineups that are on the bad end of the tee time. So like I said, you want to be limited with the kind of guys that you're playing in the AM wave, but make them guys that you liked on a Monday, that you were willing to bet outright, that you think have legit winning upside. Where if they go out there, they have a -5, -6 round tomorrow, even in the harder conditions on Friday. If they can grind out an even par or a -1 round, they're going to be there. out there towards the weekend. So I don't think those guys are out of play. Again, just wanting to point that out to everyone. But yeah, definitely on the negative end of that weather draw. Rico Hoy here at $7,500. I wanted to point out his ownership number as he's one of the highest owned players out here in this range. If you guys have Matt Wallace that project very similar in my projections and about half the ownership of somebody like a Rico. So obviously he's got great form heading in. I mean, guys like Meissner, Hall almost went out there and won events over the last few weeks. So obviously there's a reason to getting to some of these players. But the fact that Rico's twice the ownership as a Vegas, twice the ownership of a Matt Wallace, is 1.5 times the ownership of guys like a Harry Hall or a Mac Meissner who have gone out there and also almost won tour events, is I think a mistake, right? Rico's had a great run of form himself, but a lot of the guys up top, I mean, Chan Kim will throw into that as well. Ball striking the absolute living shit out of it recently. I think are all worthy of getting some ownership, and then everyone's just clicking Rico. So I wanted to play on Monday. He was one of my top projected plays. That's why I had him in the player pool my first run. But by the time we got to Wednesday and he was the highest owned of the bunch, just made him somebody that I'm clicking out of my player pool. So obviously I don't have him down as a fade, but I'll just tell you I'm not playing him out there in my lineups. Reason why I prefer Matt Wallace is, first off, similar, if not better, approach numbers to what we have with Rico, and the longer term better player, somebody that's won on tour before. And if he's going to be half the ownership, right, I'll make that pivot all day. A few other guys in that range that could fit that description, and Adam Svensson, somebody like I said, Chan Kim, Harry Hall, Mike Meissner. I'm playing one of those three out there in my lineups this week. So definitely a few guys that you can use as pivot plays. Andrew Novak is a PM Wave player. Same thing with Austin Eckroat. We're going to talk about Eckroat here in a second. Definitely something I want to point out about Eckroat. You could probably see it. That big fat 14.8% right there. But Andrew Novak at $7,400. Love the fact that he's PM. He's not getting a ton of exposure in terms of his ownership. 9.9% isn't low by any means, but the kind of guy I'll play at like 10%, where I've got Hoey at like 11.6%, is a guy that I'm willing to bid outright, right? Rico wasn't that sort of play for me, so that's why I'll exclude him, right? But if you were on Rico on Monday and maybe you weren't on Andrew Novak, well, maybe you're fading Novak and maybe you're playing Hoey instead, right? So obviously you can play a few pieces of chalk in your player pool. It's not about who you play, it's about how you play them out there in your lineups. But just make your stands on the guys that you actually have some conviction behind. If you actually think they're going to go out there and have a top 10, top 15, and you're willing to eat that chalk, well, do it sparingly. Do it in a few spots that you feel comfortable with. And you don't have to. If you want to fade all the chalk, that's viable as well. But, if you're going to take a piece or two, just, be careful. Don't take a whole bunch of it, and do it on the guys that you actually feel good about. Andrew Novak, we mentioned him. Doug Gim, I want to point out as a play as well. What I like about Doug Gim is the fact that he's lower owned than what I was expecting. He's about 7.9% projected owned. I thought he was going to be closer to 10% out there on Monday, so I was a little bit worried about that out here on Wednesday. But $7,300, he's PM Wave, so we like that. He's accurate off the tee, which I think is what we're looking for in terms of players at the 3M Open. And for this season has been a little bit of a sleeper. He's just been making a lot of cuts, a lot of like top 25, top 30 finishes, just quietly getting the job done. And at $7,300 in this sort of weak field, instead of a top 25, maybe he turns it into a top 10. Heck, maybe he even turns it into a top 5 finish like we've seen from him in the past. And at $7,300, that would more than pay off. So I thought people would be on the Gim train this week. I mean, people have been on him all year. So the fact that he's only 7.9% in this kind of field at a golf course that fits his game, it makes me somebody that's, I'm going to be well over the field on. Now let's have the Austin Eckroat talk. I love Eckroat, guys. You guys know I bet him. I was like, this guy's like $2,000 too cheap. The issue is, as you can see with the ownership here, everyone knows that. And I mean, everyone knows that. Everyone's going to be playing Austin Eckroat this week. And honestly, I've got him at 14.8%, which I think is higher than most others in the industry out there with an ownership projection. I think he might be 30% owned. I think I might be well under in terms of his projection right here. I'm still playing him. Full transparency, he's going to be mega chalk this week. I mean, like way too high owned. Full transparency. So I don't love the play when it comes to that angle, but I think he might win the golf tournament. So if you're going to play some donkey chalk guy like this, as DGen would call him, DGen75, my boy out there, would 100% call Austin Eckroat donkey chalk. If you're going to play him, you better like him this week, okay? You better have had him on your list on Monday. You better have bet him outright out there on Monday if you're going to be playing him. Because if you're playing a guy that's 15% owned down here in the 7K range and you don't like him, you're an absolute donkey to go out there and do that. So I'd say if you're not as passionate about him this week as I am, you should probably not be playing Austin Eckroat. So that's the point of me pointing that out there. Obviously on Monday, I don't know where the ownership's going to come in. I had a feeling he was going to be chalky. So that's why I'm still okay playing him like 14.8%. I know that playing him is not going to get me different. I know I'm going to have to do so with other value spots or potentially even with like an 8, 9K player. I'm going to have to try and get a little bit different up there. But you can make that work, right? Again, it's not who you play. It's how you play them out there in lineups. But yeah, 14.8% ownership. Oh boy, that is not a great number right there. Moving down to the 6K range, I've got one last play I want to point out. I guess worth noting in the 6K range that there's not really any mega chalk down here. In fact, just off the top of my head, I think your highest owned players are about like 3 to 4% owned. So, you know, the chalk is really down here in the 7K range. It's really like guys like an Eckroat, guys like a Hoey, right, at like 11, maybe 12% ownership. Your 6K range is pretty much flat. You can play whoever you want. At most, you're talking like 4% ownership. So guys like an Adam Schenk, who's been in dreadful form recently, is the kind of guy I'll take for a little bit of a bounce back. He's in the proper wave. He's had top 10 finishes this year. He's contended at events in 2024. I know he's fallen off. His form's not there, but sometimes you've got to take a chance on a player's long-term pedigree, right? But they've shown us, and it's not even like this is 4 or 5 years ago that this guy showed us this. It's not like we're talking about some old guy like Zach Johnson having a renaissance. It's a guy that this season, right, has gone out there and shown it to us. So, you know, down here in the 6K range, I like some of those bounce back candidates. A Davis Riley would fit that description. He's won this season, right? I know the form's not great, but you're going to get him at sub 5%. A Chris Gotterup's won this year. You know what? He's sub 5% owned too. And you know what? I'm also playing him right out there in my lineup. So, you know, those are 3 guys at $6,700 that I'm using in lineups this week. But I think in total, I have like 6, maybe 7 guys in the 6K range in my player pool this week. So there just happens to be 3 that are at that same price tag that are all pretty much right next to each other on my projections that I'm using. But hopefully it gives you an idea of the players that I'm using down low. I'm looking for upside. There's a reason why these guys are in the 6K range, right? Their form in most cases is not going to be there. You're looking for long-term upside. Guys that have a high birdie percentage, that have proven that they have a chance to top 5, top 10, because that's what you need to go out there and bank a GPP. To go out there and beat 20, that sometimes even more entries than that, more than 20,000 entries out there in a contest, you've got to have the nuts. You've got to have that guy in the 6K range that gets you that top 5 finish. So that's what I'm looking for. And I don't think you should just be fishing for that, right? That's a fool's errand at times, trying to go down there and scattershot the 6K range. You know, you got to have some conviction behind your plays. That's why I only have 6 or 7 out there in my 150 max, because I want to play 10, maybe even 12% of all of those players down low. So if you're going to take guys down there, feel comfortable with them, and you shouldn't just be, you know, spraying and praying with random slapdicks. One other guy I'll point out down low, I do like myself some Troy Merritt at $6,500. So he's in my player pool. I know I don't have him on here as one of my plays, but he's also sub 3% ownership. So I like him at Birdie Fest. He's in that PM wave like I'm looking for. And the form's actually been a lot better than you'd expect out there for Troy Merritt. So those are the highlighted plays, not even just to give you guys to use, right? That's not the idea there. It's more so to show you guys what I'm looking for in players. Give you some of the ownership dynamic, show you guys some of the landmines when it comes to chalk, and then help give you guys ideas for what to look for in your process. So now let's go through some of your questions, and afterwards we'll talk through some props. So where did we leave off? How about Nick Dunlap? Could he drive the ball accurate enough? Yeah, that's going to be the real question, Kevin. One thing I want to say is kid is a stud. You know, I called that early. Right? I wanted to be early to the Nick Dunlap train. I had a few guys in chat that have tried to chirp me over the last few months. Well, now the kid has gone out there and won twice, right, in just this season alone. So that's more than a lot of their favorite players, I would assume. It's better than a lot of the top 30 players on the PGA Tour that have won 0 events here in 2024. So, yeah, first off, I wanted to say that because there's a few people that have gone comments from like, oh, keep talking up Nick Dunlap. Like, where are you at now, buddy, right? After the 2 wins. And, yeah, can he drive it accurate enough? I think so. You know, he did decently on some of the Florida swing courses. Wasn't his best, though. So I don't think it's the best course fit. I'm a little bit worried about it. But the kid is a stud. If he were to go out there and do so, win back-to-back, it would not surprise me. I've been on record as saying that I think he's a top 5 talent someday on the PGA Tour. I think he has the potential to be a superstar, a top 5 player. And I'll stand behind that now, especially after another win. So, if you're one of those Nick Dunlap haters down there in chat, where are you at now, by the way? I'm waiting for your comment. Steven says, any concern about Finau and Batia being AM PM? Yeah, some concern, right? Especially with Finau, that's like 30% owned. So if you're going to take somebody up top like that, Steven, you better love them, is what I'll say. They better be somebody that you had as one of your top options, because reality is, if you're trying to choose between somebody in their AM PM and one's PM AM, you should probably be taking the PM AM guy, right? That doesn't mean you only have to take PM AM guys, but if you are choosing between the two, I would lean towards the other option. You're new to Golf DFS. You throw a lineup together of those 6. What are my thoughts? So I'll give you some general thoughts, Jody. So you've got a bunch of chalk there, I would say. I think the ownership there, Jody, is a little high, but I'd also have to know what kind of a contest that you're entering. If you're entering a really large contest with like 1,000 plus entries, the ownership's probably a little bit too high there. If you're entering like a smaller field contest, you're probably okay. So if you're still in chat, let me know. And Anthony says, are Hoagie and Keegan still solid plays? I think that up top, if you're on one of those players, don't let weather talk you off of them. So kind of like I was saying up there with Finau and Batia, if you loved those two, so if you love Hoagie and Keegan, you're still playing them. Personally, I'm not going to let you know whether I liked them or not heading into the week. But if you loved them, you're playing them. If you didn't like them beforehand, you're probably still not playing them, is how I would handle it. Cheers to another golf tournament. Cheers to you. Got my coffee here. Completely random thought. Do I think the shorter drivers have an edge? I'll give you my thoughts there. The short answer is no. The shorter hitters aren't about it. I'll give you a few facts that are going to help you with windy conditions. So, a few things that help you when it's windy. If you're short, and if you're not a tall human being, the wind does not affect you as much, right? You're closer to the ground. You have a lower center of gravity. It helps you out a lot. Prime examples of that, Brian Harmon. Honestly, I could just stop right there, right? Brian Harmon, his short little hobbit shit is perfect out there in the wind. Low ball flight would be the other one. Guys that hit the driver low tend to play really well in the wind. So players that are known for that, Gary Woodland, right? He hits that driver, stinger driver almost every time he hits the ball. If you don't have to change your ball flight in the wind, if you're already hitting the ball low, that's a great thing. If you can hit the ball low, that's helpful. But the guys that already hit it low to begin with are at a massive advantage because they don't have to change their play style. So Gary Woodland is probably the best PGA Tour example. Minwoo Lee as well hits a lot of low drivers. Live Tour, worth pointing out, you've got a few guys over there that do it well as well. Joaquin Niemann, probably the most notorious over there. That's really good playing in the wind. So low ball flight, much more important than like whether you're long or short off the tee. And then believe it or not, the short guys, that's probably the biggest factor, believe it or not. And it's blowing you when you're hitting the ball, when you're actually standing over it, getting blown like back and forth. And then when you're putting as well, right? It can make you unstable if you're taller. Anthony says, thoughts on Clanton. So yeah, you mentioned the tee time already. Kid's a stud. I think that we're going to have to see a little bit more before I give you any definitive take, but the shots gained metrics look amazing. I mean, he's gaining like 2 strokes ball striking. The off the tee stats, he looks as accurate as some of the most accurate players on tour, and he looks as long as Rory McIlroy. So I say looks like because it's a small sample. Things can change, of course, but if he does it this week, I think we got to start looking at Luke Clanton as a serious contender. Buckley for the Cinderella win. I like the call. That would be a heck of a Cinderella win. And I like that you have little stones out there with that take. Why is Eckroat chalk? Haven't read any tops. Not in great form. There's a few reasons why. So last year he was mega chalk at this event. He putts really well on bent grass, and the form is really good. If you take a look at the shots gained metrics, he's gaining over a stroke per round when it comes to his ball striking stats. And if you zoom out and look at the last 24 measured rounds, it's even better for Austin Eckroat. He's gaining 0.7 strokes per round, losing when they're around the green with the putter, which isn't great. But Austin Eckroat is right now is just hitting the ball unbelievably well. He's the kind of player that fits these kind of courses. A lot of people have comped this the PGA National, and I've seen him talked up 1,000 different times. He started the week at 80 to 1. In fact, he was 100 to 1 on a few books, and now he's like 40 to 50 to 1 out there on books. So how do I know he's going to be chalk? People are talking him up. ball striking stats are there. He was chalkier last year, and you can just tell he's chalk when you've played this for long enough, right? I can tell you he'll be at least 10%. Like I said, I think maybe close to 15%, if not higher than that. Between Thor, Bjornsson, and Stevens, who would I choose? I like Thor more. If you're looking for a weather edge, you're going to go out there with Sam Stevens. If you don't care about weather, you're probably playing Thor Bjornsson. Looking to get back into DFS, just resub to the Patreon, smash these contests. You heard it. And hey, if you need back in the Discord, let me know, Jake. I got you. Kevin says, one more question. How about Carson Young? I like him at Birdie Fest. The form's decent. I'll say that he's in the proper wave as well, Kevin. So pretty solid option. It's a small cash lineup. So yeah, cash definitely changes it. Yeah, go all PM AM then. I love that if you're playing cash, and ownership doesn't matter there. So if you do that, I think you're perfect. Missed the start, so apologies if I covered it, but thoughts on Grazerman and his course fit. So Grazerman, I think, is a very average course fit. He's playing decently in terms of form, right? He's coming in number 14 in recent form ranking. If you're looking for like a course fit angle, though, I don't know if it's really there. I mean, if you take a look at the shots gained profile, he's pretty much mediocre across the board. He doesn't do anything particularly well. Approach play is a negative. He gains with the putter, which I guess is nice, but off the tee isn't particularly accurate or long. So I don't know. He's the kind of guy that can play well anywhere because his shots gained profile is pretty stagnant. It's close to average about everything, right? So that translates to almost every golf course. It's hard to say that you like him anywhere though, right? Because it's like, what do you even hone in on out there with his stat profile? So I don't hate him. It's just hard to really get a huge read on it. Any concern for the EVR withdrawal? Haven't heard much about it. It might have just been the alternate field. I haven't heard anything about an injury. So yeah, until I see anything, James, no concern. And a lot of times, even with those kind of narratives, they're bullshit, right? Hideki's probably the one that you pay attention to the most out there with weather concerns. But a lot of times people say it's a back injury and they just wanted to get out of town. So until we get a lot of like information on it, no, right? Like it's hard to have a lean either way when we've seen this weather narrative just slap people in the face. Maybe we've had guys withdraw with injury, next start go out there and win, right? It's just, I don't know. And there's countless examples of the opposite, right? Where guys have said that they're injured and then miss the cut or withdraw. So it's tough. And you said you feel like he's one of the strongest options in the AK. I agree with you. He's one of my favorite plays this week, James. So I'm still using him. I have him as a conviction play. If he withdraws, that's something that we're going to have to live with, right? Especially if you're playing him yourself. I like the upside, though. And I think that's why you're pointing him out. I think he's got that upside. Thoughts on Shipley? Love the hair. Don't love the tee time. But again, if you love the guy, you still play him, even with the AM wave, because that's not the end all be all. When I refer to the last few rounds, is there a sweet spot between 12 and 24 that I like? I like 12 for recent form. I like 24 for just over the last month or so. So I don't think there's like a specific number I like the most, but I use both of those. Is TBC Lee sneaky? Yes, he'll be low owned. He'll be sub 5%. So if you're looking for a low owned option, he's definitely that for you. Who do I like from the bottom end of the salary range that could fit into value? If you scroll back, Samuel, I talked to like 6 or 7 of them. So you might want to check those out. Thoughts on Ryan Moore? Ryan Moore, I've seen some love for him this week. I've seen a few people talk him up. I've got to say, I'm not as sold on him myself, but there's a reason why people are pointing him out. Let's point it out that way, right? Like there's some shots gained metrics there. There's some decent form, some bent grass putting stats. I'm not against the play. I just don't love him as much as other people do. Do I have a favorite single entry for AM PM for like maybe going like the other side of the weather? Probably Akshay. Akshay, I bet him at 22.5 to 1. So obviously I think he's a pretty good play. Yeah, probably Akshay or Keith. One of those two. Keith's gone back-to-back top fives. Akshay's got like the best form in the field. One of those two would be the guy for me. What did you miss? Are we favoring the PM guys? We are, Ali. And if you want to scroll back, you can watch everything on replay. But yeah, we're playing PM guys. We talked through ownership and some of my top plays. Now we're about to talk through some prop stuff. So before we talk through the props, let's make one lineup together, give you guys a taste for what I'm thinking through when building lineups and the thought process. So if you have any last second DFS questions, now is the time for it. Smash the like button if you guys haven't already, and let's build a little bit of a GPP lineup together. So this is going to be out there for like the big $20, maybe the big $5 contest. and how you're trying to beat a large field of players. So like 37,000, like you'd have in this kind of contest, or really anything above 5,000 entries. When you're playing against that sort of field, you've got to really think about your lineup construction. You've got to try and find leverage and get uniqueness to the field. And leverage and uniqueness, while they'll be used interchangeably by a lot of touts, they're not the same thing. And I guess just to preface this lineup building section, I'm going to explain the difference between the two, because you have to be able to accomplish both out there in a large field GPP. So start out there with uniqueness. Uniqueness is getting different in terms of not duplicating with other lineups. Uniqueness can be done either by leaving salary on the table or by taking lower ownership players. By doing that, right, you're making sure that you're not going to split first place with multiple people. That aspect is just as important as your leverage out there. And leverage, completely different aspect. Leverage is your ability to move up the leaderboard, whether it's moving up with a solid performance or getting pushed down the leaderboard out there with a poor performance. You want leverage. Essentially, leverage, right, is when you can get well over the field on somebody. When you can get well over the field on somebody, when that player does well, you proportionally do better based on the leverage that you have. So if you have 3-4x leverage as opposed to maybe like 1-2x leverage, that'll give you a better opportunity to actually move up on the leaderboards. There's a difference between the two. We need to maximize both of them. And for the large field GPPs, you have to take it to the extreme. You can't be duplicating. Duplicating yourself in the large field GPP is about the worst thing that you could possibly do for your ROI. And then you have to have enough leverage to beat 38,000 people, right? So like, this is the most extreme example of lineup building that you get. Single entries, you can tone it back a little bit, right? Because duplicating, you're not going to have as many lineups that you could duplicate yourself with, right? And when you're only trying to beat like 500 to 1,000 other entries, well, you don't have to have as much ability to move up the leaderboard, right? To only beat 500 other people. So when you're playing those kind of contests, you don't have to be as extreme as what we're about to be with this kind of lineup. And this is what I mean by extreme. So in these kind of lineups, I like the idea of the weather edge. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to lock in some PM players. So we're going to take Burns. We're going to take Poston. We're going to throw in McNeely, who's also a PM player at $8,300. And this isn't where our leverage is going to come from. These are just guys that we're taking up top and plugging in. And for our last three spots is we're going to have to get all of our leverage and all of our uniqueness. So a couple ways we can do this. I plan on leaving some salary on the table. It's going to help us out with the uniqueness. And to get our leverage, we're going to have to take 3 low-owned players. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to throw in a Chan Kim at $7,600. I've got him at just under 10% ownership, but he's also PM wave, so helps us out there. I'm going to go a little bit cheaper, and we're going to take a really low-owned PM guy. So we're going to take, I was going to say Jake Knapp, but like even he's like 5%. If we're really going to try and stretch the ownership, like maybe we take a Royo Hesitune. And because we have $7,800, you might be tempted to go up here and spend all of it. With this kind of lineup, if you're entering against 38,000 other entries, I would be very tempted to leave some salary on the table. Not only is that going to like ensure that our lineup's not going to get duplicated, but it's also going to give us some added little leverage out there with, you know, just trying to spend down a little bit instead of taking all of these like high-end 7K players that are like 10, 15% owned. Like even your low-owned players up here at the top end of the 7K range are like 9, 10%. If we're going to fit in another guy that's sub 5%, we're going to have to go significantly cheaper here. So an option that I would point out would be like an Adam Svensson, who I've got at like 5, 6%. So here we've got $400 on the table, which is going to help us out with not duplicating yourself. We've got 2 sub 5%ers. Svenny might be like 5, 6%. So he's kind of pushing that right there. You've got Chan Kim at like 10% and a McNeely at like 12%. This lineup will have enough leverage for the large field GPP and likely enough uniqueness as well. So it's not like we did anything crazy there either, right? We don't have like 3 sub 5% owned plays in this lineup, right? We don't have any like terrible plays out there in this kind of build either. All 6 are very reasonable players. They're all PMAM wave, if that's your kind of thing out there in your lineups. And our cheapest guy is only $7,100. And we do have a 10K guy and a 9K guy out there in this kind of build. So you can leave salary on the table. You can still take legit players and play a weather edge and get all the uniqueness and leverage that you're looking for. So this is about as extreme as I'd go. Like if you're looking to get different, I mean, leaving $400 on the table is pretty extreme going out there to do so. But it's not like you have to leave $1,000 to go out there and accomplish that. So let's see, any last second DFS stuff? If not, we're going to talk props. Can we see some nasty Nate Lashley? He plays well at Birdie Fest. I'll say that about him. I don't think he's in the best form, but he does play well at these kind of events. Of course, I got you. This seems like a Vegas kind of golf course. Is there a good way to get different? Oh, yeah, he is. It is a good course. He finished in second here 3 years ago, so he's shown it before as well. And the form is a lot better than some would expect. I'll just say this, James. I had him in my player pool until I went and built lineups. I just couldn't fit it into enough builds to get the leverage I was looking for. And he was literally the last man out of my player pool. And if there's one thing I'll say, historically, the last man out of my player pool normally goes out there and smashes. Normally goes out there in like top 5, top 10s, just to go out there and kind of rub a little bit of salt in the wound. So yeah, Johnny Vegas, I've got him at pretty low ownership. I think I got him at like 7%. Play his ass, right? Because if I couldn't get to him, get to the exposure yourself so at least one of us can take advantage if he has a good week. There's obviously a reason why I took him out as compared to other players, but I still think he's in play. So yeah, first man out, probably going to go off. Hey, Luke, would I give any consideration to the FedEx Cup points? Yeah, I think it matters, but it's hard to quantify. It's really hard to say how a player is going to like react to that pressure. Some, I'm sure, will step up their game. I think Chesson Hadley might be the best example of that. Almost all of his FedEx Cup points come this time of year. So whether it's this event, whether it's the Wyndham Championship that he lights up, he almost always like makes it on the number there. There are certain guys that you can play that narrative for, and then I'm sure plenty that also melt under the pressure. So I would say that it's a tough narrative to narrow down, so not one that I'll use. But if you have a narrative on any specific player and you want to run with it, you know, I'm not against that, right? Like for me, the only one that really stands out would be that Chesson Hadley one. But if you've got any other ones in mind, then yeah, maybe you run with it. All right, let's talk through some prop stuff. So, like I said, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. We've got a lot of props I want to point out here. So it started off with the scoring averages from last year. So scoring average was 1.29 under. Your birdie or better average was 4.24 per round. Bogey or worse average, just over 2.6 per round. And you can see the fairway and green and regulation averages at the bottom. I want to start off with some exposure on Underdog to start because they've actually got guys at the same lines that I took them at on Monday, which is literally a Christmas miracle, as normally they just bump all my shit out of oblivion. And they did on Monday. They moved everything down on Monday, but since then they've actually moved them back to the props that I took on Monday, which I'm totally fine with. Still think they're decent values at the numbers that they're at. So we're going to start with this Cam Davis under, and we're going to pair him up with a Pendrith under at 69 strokes. So here's a narrative that is important to me round one. And I guess I'll point this out. This is not just for props, guys. If you're playing Showdown tomorrow, listen up. This might win you a lot of money if you're playing Showdown tomorrow. And it might win you a lot of money for props in first round leader as well. If you didn't know, by the way, last week, they played the Open Championship. A lot of your top level players over in Scotland. And if you didn't know, something called jet lag exists. And some may say, oh, it's not a thing. Like these are world-class athletes. They're not going to get jet lag. They are. They're going to get a little bit tired. And if there's going to be a day where jet lag affects players, it will be Thursday. It'll be tomorrow, right? When they're still trying to adjust from coming over. I think some guys, it'll be a breeze. They'll probably be 100% out there. But there will be players out there in round one that do not have their best stuff. And it is probably because they're dealing with that jet lag. I think the players that are most susceptible to it are the ones that are teeing off in the afternoon on Thursday, as their biological clocks are going to be towards midnight, right, out there when they're teeing off. So if there are going to be guys that I think you want to fade out there for Showdown, it's the guys playing tomorrow afternoon. Especially, and it's not just like anyone playing tomorrow afternoon, it's the ones that are coming over from the Open Championship. So what I've done for first round leader, when I've actually done for already a bunch of Showdown lineups that I've entered, and then for all my props round one, is I'm only playing guys, and this is like for overs on birdies or unders on strokes, that have not played last week, that did not touch a club over there overseas. Maybe they played the Barracuda. Maybe they just took the week off, right, and weren't dealing with anything last week. Those are the only players that I am using in props for tomorrow. First round leader, I bet a whole bunch of first round leaders on guys that I like, that a lot of them were going off early tomorrow, and a lot of them were guys that didn't play at the Open Championship. I think if you target morning guys for Showdown tomorrow and guys that didn't play at the Open, might be a gold mine. We'll have to see. There still might be a few that go off that came over from overseas, but I have a sneaking suspicion that even the AM players that are coming over from overseas might struggle out there on Thursday. And if it works out, it might win me a bunch of money out there for Showdown. So obviously, when we do the round 2 Showdown stream, I'll report back with how that went. The reason why I like these two in particular is Cam Davis has decent course history around here. In fact, if I'm going to give you the course history for Cam Davis, he's gone T10, T16, T28, and T12, his last 4 events here. And in terms of his hit rate for this under at 68.5 strokes, it's well over a 75% hit rate. And in fact, I think it's like an 80% hit rate over those last 4 years. Taylor Pendrith doesn't have as elite of course history, but is coming in with a win recently, right? Has been playing a lot better this season. And though his only start here was a missed cut, he's a different player at this stage. So he's got to shoot -2 to go out there and push. A -3 would be a hit. He's at 68.5 strokes on sportsbooks, so you're getting a 0.5 discrepancy there. And Cam Davis is also at 68.5, but he's obviously at that number. So I like the under in both. They're both AMT times. So that'll be when wins will be at their lowest. And as you'd expect, neither one played the Open Championship, right? Pendy was, I believe, playing the Barracuda Championship. I believe Cam Davis, let me double check on him. He might not have played last week, actually, Cam Davis. But yeah, neither one played the Open Championship, which I think is going to be key out there for our exposure. And yeah, 2 guys that I would take over there on Underdog. For prize picks, I've got a few options over here as well. And let's start it off with this. So first off, it was an under on Nick Dunlap strokes. He's at 69. He won the Barracuda, right? He played last week and he won on tour, but he didn't win the Open, right? He wasn't over there in Scotland. And then another prop I'm going to mix in. They had a birdie or better matchup up. It was between Keith Mitchell and Nate Lashley, but they ripped that off. Just to tell you why I liked that one. Keith Mitchell, the number 2 birdie maker on tour, against Lashley, who was number 109 on tour. So obviously, I'd like number 2 over number 109, but they ripped that off. So maybe you could just take this Keith Mitchell over on birdies. Which did they rip that off too? Look at that, those bastards. They had him up at 4.5 birdies earlier, and now that's not even on the board anymore. So that was going to be the pairing for this prop. So I guess if I'm going to give you a backup, this isn't a prop that I've entered myself, but you could actually, it is something I've entered. So I actually took this over there on Underdog, 68.5, right? He was the same thing as Cam Davis. He's hit this his last 8 rounds here. He's gone top five at the 3M Open. He's covered this all 4 rounds the last 2 years he's played this event. And yeah, I took it on Underdog for my exposure, but because we had that birdie or better matchup ripped off, you can mix that in over here. Great course history, as you'd guess, with those 2 top 5 finishes, and good form heading in, gaining over 2 strokes with the ball striking. And Nick Dunlap, similar story, right? Great form heading in, obviously, with the win at the Barracuda. And Keith Mitchell, he didn't play the Open Championship, which kind of BS, honestly. He should have been in that Open Championship field, but he wasn't over there. Don't have to worry about that with him. And same thing with Nick Dunlap. So I think if there's like a hidden narrative to go out there and use for tomorrow, it's avoiding a lot of these guys like a Keegan, a Burns who played overseas, I believe McNeely, yeah, he played overseas, a Hadwin did. Like, I think a few of them are going to have decent rounds. Like, they're world-class players. They can battle through it, but it would not surprise me at all if a handful of those guys went out there and kind of struggled tomorrow. So that's what I'll say about the prop side. Let's catch up on chat, then hop on out of here. Hey, dude, 5 tournaments this weekend. Any thoughts on a 5-player each way? 5 tournaments. What do we got, by the way? I didn't realize there were that many going on. So we got Live, obviously. We've got this event, LPGA, DP World Tour, and then I'm not sure what the 5th one would be. But hey, if I'm going to give you, I'll at least give you my Live Tour advice. I haven't done enough research on the other ones. My card, let me share my screen here. Here's my betting card for the PGA. So my betting card for the PGA, I went Akshay, Keith Mitchell, EVR, Griot, Ben Griffin, Thor Bjornsson, Novak, and Eckroat. And then for the Live Tour, I only bet one outright. I bet John Rahm at 7.1 to 1, which was I boosted up from like 6.5 to 1 to 7.1 with a boost on Hard Rock bet. So I would go with maybe John Rahm if you're going with any Live Golf bet. But yeah, those are the 8 that I took for PGA. All you're going to say is that Tom Hoge is coming to play. I'd love to see it. He's a great guy. I love Tom Hoge. He's one of my favorite players out there. So yeah, best of luck, man. Turnover says, how about Sahith under that 14.5 greens? Yeah, so I was looking at that myself. In fact, let me share my screen once again before we hop on out of here. So on Prize Picks, I was looking at a few unders. So there are a few fairway unders I was looking at, potentially this Poston one, this Keith Mitchell under, a few unders like that. Heck, even like a Oxley under 14.5. The issue is that they've gotten a lot of rain this week, and I think it might be super soft. So I actually think that there are a few in play. Like I said, like these 5 props are in play if it's going to be firmer than we expect. But if it's going to be as soft as it could be tomorrow morning, like maybe I'd avoid those. So I'm going to avoid entering any of those unders until I see the golf course and whether there's a bounce out there. Because if there's a bounce on the greens, I will probably play some unders. But if they're hitting the greens and sticking in place, like we sometimes get at this event, I don't think I'd want to be taking unders on greens. It's going to be a literal dart fest if that's the case, which would be my only concern with that. Hadwin has hit 10 of 10 times for the over fairways. I was looking at that myself, dude, but he's like number 80 on tour this year in accuracy. So I actually started the other way around. I actually wanted to see if he would be a good under at 9.5. And I looked at 2023. He went over every time. Year before that went over every single time. So I was like, okay, probably not the best bet. But then I looked at his season-long average, and he was not doing very well with the driving accuracy. It's a tough one, right? Like historically, he's hit the fairways here, but this year the driving accuracy hasn't been there. So to me, that screams a stay away spot, right? When we have conflicting data points, when it's not really a conclusive play in either direction, is usually when it's best just to stay away. So that would be my advice. At least that's what I'm doing out there on that prop. Pat Rogers, another sneaky low-owned option. You heard it there yourself, there from Barry R. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for this live stream. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared for all of your exposure this week. Go ahead, smash that like button if you haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. Going to have round 2 through 4 live streams as usual. Those will be sponsored by the Ship It Nation, bringing you guys all the information for Friday through Sunday from the prop and DFS side of things. So going to go ahead, keep it rolling throughout the weekend, and hopefully we can make it one for the record books. Thank you guys. As I said before, best of luck with all of your exposure, and I'll see you guys tomorrow night for that live stream.